Welcome to my latest series, Life After Kerbin. I am your host, Sonat the Hero Type, and this is a brief introduction of what the series is going to be about. This will be a full-scale roleplay series. We will have no UI screens, we'll have no build videos, nothing along the lines of that. It'll be a lot of shorter, quick-cut, action sequence shots, and a voiceover that is going to be semi-scripted like a diary or a documentary. This is going to be a brand new style for me, so I hope you guys enjoy. We will be delaying the launches even though we are using Kerbal construction time, purely because early game builds build really fast, even though I have construction time turned up to the biggest delay. We will be using the standard 365 12-month period like Earthwood, but we're going to be doing it a little bit different. Each episode will cover about a year, and we're going to be basically acting like we are a privatized company exploring space, doing contracts, as well as milestone goals, as well as scientific discovery, and it will all be done by the RSEC Rhodes Scientific Exploration Coalition. So without further ado, let me introduce you guys to the very first video ever of Life After Kerbin. Day 7, Nautilus 1's first launch, using a solid rocket booster to gather telemetry data and science to understand the difference in atmospheric pressure the farther we got from the surface of Rhodes. The rocket itself was a complete success, reaching roughly 113 kilometers above the surface. No recovery attempts were made as the probe came crashing back down into the mountains. Using the data acquired, we prepped our second Nautilus to launch at a slightly different trajectory to see if the results were the same. This will give us further data to launch bigger and more advanced vehicles later in the year. Day 26, the Nautilus 2 has successfully been rolled out to the launch pad. This will be another suborbital trajectory test with telemetry data. We also picked up a government contract to reach the upper atmosphere, which netted us 19,000 funds for future research and development in the program. Due to the more aggressive pitch of the rocket, it did experience some extreme heating, but everything ended up fine. No damage was reportedly done to the craft before it impacted back onto Rhodes. The new telemetry data acquired will help us with further development of our first orbital launch vehicle. New additional science instruments will be added to later probes to help push the development of launch vehicles as well as scientific discovery. After realizing the lack of ignitions that a solid rocket booster could provide us, a liquid fuel option was designed. Designated E32 using the Merlin A engine, we did several camera takes as well as a thermometer test on the engine to detect heat, thrust, as well as other things to design and build our very first base launch booster for our very first orbital launch vehicle. The particular fuel tank will be recovered and reused to test additional engines later in the year. Day 98. The E32 launch vehicle has been officially tested using the Rimir 1 probe, Rimir standing for Discoverer in Latin. This will be our first orbital attempt to reach space and get a rough orbit. This will also be doing a long-term temperature scan in orbit using the thermometer, which we've started using in recent days. Tests show slight controllability issues as the control surfaces are pretty outdated, as well as there's no additional control surfaces or reaction surfaces on the craft. Despite this, the craft did successfully make it into orbit and released the probe, Rinmir 1. Due to the lack of solar panels or additional charge, Rinmir 1 was not projected to last very long once into orbit, but the data recovered was very helpful to the R&D team, and this was considered a success. After successfully retrofitting and refurbishing the booster from the first test, we attached a Mothra F1 engine, which is a vacuum optimized engine, to it. Using the same test parameters as our last test, with the addition of a Geiger counter to detect radiation output of the engine. All tests moved forward with excellent responses, and we were able to fully design, build, and make a second stage for our E3 launch vehicle, now referred to as the E32. The E32 vehicle is slightly overbuilt for its purpose, but as we're expecting heavier and bigger payloads in the future, this was done by design. All tests came back with positive feedback, data was recorded, and the vehicle is off to be assembled. A joke made by one of the engineers about launching a probe into the side of the moon, Luna, which is the nearing neighbor moon to our planet, ended up turning into a game plan to actually shoot a probe into the side of Luna in a later launch. Day 237, the Rinmir 2 successfully got onto the launch pad. Due to upgrades at the facility, all launches were delayed for a slight bit. Realizing with this two-stage booster they have designed, they had enough Delta V and their tech now to reach the surface of Luna, their neighboring moon. Before launch, it was decided that if they were successful into getting into orbit with the new launch vehicle, they would attempt to send the probe on a trajectory to the surface to impact Luna. They were able to muster up a government contract which paid out enough funds to help cover the losses of new upgrades, as well as the cost of research and development to design said rocket. With the success of getting orbital with the new booster, the team decided to separate the base booster, finalize their orbit, and prep a course to try to impact the surface of Luna. The team was successful on plotting their maneuver to reach the surface of Luna. So after the separation of the probe from the transfer stage was complete, the team sat back and waited in anticipation to see if communications range would be sufficient enough to receive contact back from the probe at that distance. This would be the farthest they'd ever attempted to contact a probe, and hoped to recover some sort of data from the upper and lower orbits around the surface of Luna. After what felt like a lifetime, data started to transmit back to the station from high above the surface of Luna. The whole team was ecstatic as more and more data poured in. After several minutes, all connection was lost, and it was assumed that we impacted the surface of the moon. Due to strange readings in the telemetry data, we believe that Luna may actually have an atmosphere of its own. More tests to come. Day 361. It's towards the end of the year now, and Luna 1 has successfully launched off the pad. The new Lunar 1 probe we have designed has an engine attached to it to help catch an orbit once they reach the area around Luna. After receiving additional government funding, as they also wanted to know if we could catch an orbit around Luna, the team was excited, to say the least, as they got ready to send this first probe to orbit a new planet, the planet that neighbors us the closest. Confident in the tech they'd already had to orbit the planet, everything went successful in that aspect. With the addition of new scientific equipment, a fairing was added to the rocket to help keep it protected during its flight through the atmosphere of Rhodes. As before, the launch into orbit was a success. Now all we had to do was plot an impact course so we didn't leave junk in space and have the probe do a slight retrograde burn to readjust itself, as well as prep to catch an orbit around the neighboring moon, Luna. Initial telemetry readings showed that our orbit was successful, as we finalized with our upper stage and plotted a course to our neighboring moon. After all calculations were done, the fairings were deployed, and they were prepping to make a trajectory burn to once again reach the neighboring planet in hopes of orbiting it. Due to a slight miscalculation in initial orbit, we had to wait a few orbits before we were actually able to successfully ignite the final burn and put ourselves on a trajectory to reach Luna. After agreeing to try to limit as much space debris as possible, the injection course was set on an impact course on the side of the surface, and the Luna 1 probe was designed to do a slight adjustment burn to put itself on a roughly 50-kilometer path above the surface of Luna to prep for its orbital burn. If successful, not only would the RSEC team show that they were capable of space launches, they'd also show that they're capable of not leaving a mess in their wake. The impact course was deemed successful, and the Luna 1 probe was detached from its injection stage to float away before making a correction to put itself in a course to do a rough orbit around Luna at approximately 50 kilometers above the surface. Due to inconclusive data readings from a possible atmosphere around Luna, we figured 50 kilometers would be the safest bet, as it was the rough Kármán line on Rhodes. As telemetry data showed that they were approaching, the retrograde orbital capture burn was put into effect. Now all we had to do was hope the engine would successfully complete its burn, and an orbit would be deemed successful. Shortly after the burn was engaged, all readings showed that they were now in a roughly stable equatorial-ish orbit around the surface. Due to minor issues during the correction, it wasn't completely equatorial like initially planned, but nonetheless, the orbit had been achieved, and we've officially orbited another planet. After the success was wrung out across Rhodes, calls from reporters and businesses wanting to ask questions and use our services started pouring in. Thus far, the RSEC team was on a projected path to do great things in the future. And that concludes the very first episode of Life After Kerbin. I want to thank you guys for stopping by. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, maybe subscribe. Keep in mind, I also have an RSS RO RP1 series on this channel as well. I will be linking that in the description, as well as linking Karnas's Coming Home series in the description, which is another Beyond Home playthrough. Different than what I'm doing, but the same similar mod pack. Either way, hope I see you guys again next time in the year 2 of Life After Kerbin.